Meet Alison Young, a former professional flute player and American public media host turned professional writer, speaker, and podcaster.
Despite many obstacles, Alison has hiked more than 12,000 miles on 6 different continents, sharing her amazing adventures as the Blissful Hiker to help inspire others on their own journeys.
Welcome to Scratch, Claw, Push, a podcast about artists clawing out a place for themselves in the world. I'm Billie Jo Cones.
And I'm Brendan Duke. Let's go. Welcome to the show, Alison Young.
Yay. Thank you. Great to be here. Thanks, guys.
I am so excited to have Alison here because, and I'll let her tell us about herself, but yeah, Brandon, go ahead. Do my lead in.
All right. So what we like to do at the top of every show, because we found it's the most efficient way to get things going, is we're going to give you 60 seconds and you're going to tell us who you are and what you do. Think of this as your verbal resume. You know, we're getting the one pager, not the full CD. And you can also look at it kind of like blackjack. You're going to go up to 60 seconds, but not over. And Billie is going to run the clock. She will cue you, and you do your thing.
You've been in radio. I trust you. I trust you have this in your body. So also you're a voice actor. So same thing. Okay. Ready? Tell me when.
Go. My name is Alison Young. I am many things. I was a professional flutist. I worked in radio at a syndicated program, a national program at American Public Media. That's why I live at St. Paul. And I have other interests as well. I'm a long distance backpacker and I've taken lessons from the trail. A lot of companies hire me to come and speak to them, to use the lessons from the trail to be more successful in life. But also the trail is a beautiful place to pick up sound and tell personal essays, to tell stories through the use of sound, of course, through the use of word, my own voice, and the written word, and the sounds that I collect. So those are the main things that I do. I'm known as the Blissful Hiker. I'm a cancer thriver and the solo female middle-aged titanium reinforced long-distance backpacker, Blissful Hiker. That was 1 minute.
All right. 4 seconds left. That's amazing. See?
Nice.
You had it in front of you too. Still good though, because some people go, "Oh, I didn't get through all of it," or "I didn't get there," or they just start riffing and telling us about their childhood in Maine. Yeah. So, yes. So Alison, tell everybody how we met.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I worked in radio for 15 years, 2 years in Houston and then 13 years here in St. Paul, and started getting more into the backpacking thing. And so I was doing a lot of other stuff. I stopped working in the radio and thought, what a great idea to use like my ability to work in front of a microphone, to use my voice in any way I want to, and editing skills and all that stuff, and become a voice artist. I mean, gosh, there's got to be tons of money in being a voice artist, right? I mean, I would be like reading books, right? So I was looking around for people, and a friend in town, Ray Burke, he doesn't live here anymore, but he's an actor, said, you have to call Billie Jo Cones, because she knows all things voice. And it wasn't just that. I mean, I think I sent you an email and I'm like, how do you become a voice artist? And you said something like, you want to talk on the phone? And I think we got on the phone and we talked for like 2 hours straight or something like that, because we were just totally connected on making our own businesses and being our own motivators, really. I mean, like not necessarily working for someone else. And like, what do you do? Like building a studio and taking auditions and all the things you have to do. So, and you led me to, now I can't think of her name right now. Who did I work with here? And I made my demo. Oh my gosh, I'm so bad with names. But it was another actress and got me into getting an agent and, and recording my demos and stuff like that. So really cool. That's how we met, on the phone. We've never met in person. And I hear you're small.
Still not. What?
I don't know. You look very tall to me, but I think you're shorter.
Oh, I'm 5'5". I'm very average.
Very average. Yeah, I'm 5'7". Not pretty average too.
Yeah, so Allison and I have now known each other for about, well, it's 3.5 years at this point.
Yeah.
Um, and I've, we've gotten to know each other through so many life events in Allison's world that to me, it's just like, I feel like you've lived a ton in the past 3.5 years.
It's been
Um,
pretty busy.
yeah, so you said, as you said, you left American Public Media after 10 years as a professional flute player, correct? Um,
Longer than that. I mean, you start like, well, 15 to 35. So 20 years of playing flute, as considering myself like, in the profession. So yeah, it's a pretty long time.
yeah,
And
so
I
can you
love that
describe those?
because, yeah, that's a whole kind of other chapter of my life. When I was 35, I developed a neurological condition called dystonia. And they usually call it focal dystonia because it's localized to a particular part of your body and a particular task. And for me, it was the flute. So when I have my hands on the flute, I'm not able to move fingers in a certain way. Not a totally clear understanding of exactly what causes it or what it is precisely. But essentially, not being a neurologist, I would say it's that the brain has kind of forgotten how to do very precise and very, professional, for lack of a better word. I mean, high level movement. So if you're playing something like a musical instrument, you could be very susceptible to sort of this. It's rare, but at this sort of cutoff of being able to move properly. And so, as you can imagine, I was playing. I played with the Boston Symphony, and I played with the Atlanta Symphony down in Georgia. And all over. I recorded. I did many things that were really exciting. I loved being a flutist. That was really I had to use the word identity. I would say more like my calling, or the way that my being thrived was to be a performing artist. And so to not be able to do things easily was just like an uphill battle. And we tried to rebuild the instrument. They do Botox injections in the place that's affected. It's my left hand. To kind of calm dystonic movements are a little bit like Parkinson's. They sort of pull back and do these sort of weird, jerky movements. So after that, I was still living in Houston, Texas, and I got into radio. I kind of fell into radio because I knew people there, and I was just like, I don't know, I'm trying to find a job in something. And they were like, what about working here? You could do an internship. And everything I've used, not only radio, but like with my podcast and with my audio narratives, which is what I was talking about with like using sound and personal narrative, all of that I learned in Houston. And so what was interesting, especially like with your particular program in terms of creativity, what was interesting that happened to me, sort of the transition from being a professional performer, which is like being an athlete. You're required to be at a very, very high level of precision, but also you're doing an interpretation of someone else's work. I never really composed. I did a little bit of like improvising somewhat, because in the Baroque style, you would add trills or something like that, but just very, very little. Most of it was like playing what was correct on the page. And so like, I don't even necessarily call being a performer like necessarily a creative pursuit. I hate to say that because I know actors are performers too, but it's kind of, it's performing. It's different. So when I got into radio, I walked in when Houston Public Media was starting a show called The Front Row. I was there for 2 years and it was amazing. 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, you had to provide content of all of the arts that were happening in Houston. So, there's the dance, there's the opera, there's, writers that come in, there's art. And I was the fastest reader. So I would read all the books and interview the writers. But what I found was like this different side of my brain was being utilized. So as much as I hated not playing anymore, it was just this incredible sort of reopening, sort of more intellectual, and certainly creative, because like you're coming up with the questions or you're writing, and you're, hosting, and I sort of did all of the parts. And it was just such a fun time. And then I came to Minnesota, much more like hosting on air, where you're sort of introducing music and coming in and out. But then I started producing programs too. So, so that it just took this other side of my brain. You know, they talk about left brain and right brain, and I found it. I mean, in a weird way, the loss ended up being kind of a gift.
Well, I mean, it's artistic or professional past lives have definitely been a theme on this show.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even in my case, like I started out wanting to be a musician, but I hurt my ears and was told like, well, your ears are done. Go find life elsewhere.
Oh my
and
gosh.
we've even had other people. Yeah, we've had other people that did very similar. Like they were starting out in one direction, something happened, and then they have to kind of pivot to something else, and that ends up being, the thing that catches on. I'm just curious, like as you're making that transition, is it somewhat of that filling that hole, because you used to kind of have this one thing you're really good at and you're getting all this kind of fulfillment from it, and now did it kind of drive you to just dive into this other thing, because you, especially being like a professional flute player, and like you're at a very high level, so you've dedicated a lot of time and a lot of energy, how to be good at something.
For
And
sure.
then just taking, I guess, knowing how to sustain that effort now, do you just kind of is that the part that you take with you to go into this other thing and now just dive in headlong?
Yeah. I mean, I think that I had this interview fairly recently, about 2 years ago, where someone asked me, I mean, not an interview like this, an interview for like a radio job. And they asked me, they shall remain nameless, but they asked me, do you work hard? And I thought, okay, first of all, I'm not like 21 out of college, like yeah, I mean, I know what hard work is, but I thought to myself, I mean, I answered the question very diplomatically, but I thought, are you kidding me? Because you can't be a professional musician and earn a living doing it. I mean, I suppose if you're a teacher or a director, possibly, but a performer, without being a hard worker. I mean, I'd hate to use the word hard too, because that implies like overusing.
Well, I feel like it's people who are not in the creative fields, their idea of hard work is, I guess, like long hours, which certainly would apply to like a professional musician. But I think it's the difference between
like
hard work. Yeah, smart. Like it's more like working smarter or just being diligent about something.
Yeah, right.
Because they think that, okay, well, I know, like I say, yeah, I heard a great, I think it was Patton Oswalt was talking about his wife who passed away, who was a writer, and he was saying that one of the things, it's not always just the act of like sitting down and getting your feet, ass in chair, fingers on keys. Sometimes it's doing all the mental work to get ready to write.
Yeah.
And
yeah. No, please. I like this idea. Go with the thread.
No. Like I said, I'm just saying, like, talk, because I feel like it's a thing, like, especially like if you're going to be, like, say, if you're doing like radio shows and you have to interview people, you have to go. I mean, most people who want to be professionals have to go, like, you have to go get familiar with your subject. You, like, in your case, like, I'm looking at your website, I'm listening to your podcast, I'm reading the stuff you're on your website, and now is that the same as digging ditches? Of course not. But it's still, you're going to take time and effort to wrap your brain around this so you can go have a conversation, an intelligent conversation, hopefully with someone.
For sure.
Like talk about like that.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I definitely agree with that. I mean, one of my mentors, well, he wasn't really my mentor. He was my boss. My mentor was great, but my boss, we shall remain nameless. He or she was just like, I never prepare. I just go in and just sort of see where the conversation takes me. And I thought, is this like a good way to teach me how to do this? I mean, I'd never done interviews before, really. I mean, I'd certainly spoken, like when I would perform, I spoke to the audience about the pieces, or, I taught for the longest time. So I was very comfortable with sort of that repartee, or understanding like bigger concepts than simply like the notes on the page. But I sort of thought that was sort of like a weird way to train someone. You're exactly right. Like you do want to like look at their website and listen to their podcast and read something, some articles, something to get an idea about what this person's doing and what they're thinking. And I got really good at interviewing people because I didn't approach it from the same place that everyone else had, like the same typical questions. It sounds like you guys too. The questions you're asking me are quite different, but you want to ask that one question that's like, oh, no one's ever asked me that before, or I'm really glad you asked me that. That's the best, right? I'm really glad you asked me that because it's starting to dig into like what their process is or what their thinking was with this particular project, or like the arc of their career and where it is now in relation to where it was, or something to that effect. I mean, I can't speak because all the different interviews I've done to anything specific at the moment, but for sure, you want to do all of that work. But the other piece that really grabbed me as a performer was like editing interviews or editing programs. I don't really do audio engineering. I mean, that's like a whole art form. These guys that were my colleagues at NPR, for instance. I mean, they have, boards that have all kinds of, dials on them, and they know, I mean, that's not really what I do. It's much more having the voice come in with a clip and just like, it's just the right clip that gets just the right mood, and then writing all around it. So it's my voice. So I'm narrating, Joshua Bell, blah, 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 violin, all his life. And then boom, it just leads into his beautiful statement about whatever it is he's playing that night. He's playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto, and how cool the little statement was that he made. And then the music, which has been playing underneath, it comes up to the big, whatever. And it's like, and so when you're listening, that thing that he says just comes alive. So you can see that I like totally nerd out, right?
Oh no, you are speaking to my music nerd heart right now. There's one of my favorite quotes, and I don't know who to attribute this to, was someone said that all art aspires to the condition of music.
Oh.
And I feel like one of the things that helps me when I'm one of the things that helps me when I'm editing is kind of like having a piece of music in mind or something. And you seem to have the same, having had that music background, you've got that thing that is just that kind of like the emotional journey of a piece, and kind of knowing when to come in right at that timing where to drop that certain thing where like in music is maybe it's like a certain, okay, now the violins come in or the drums or whatever, but but you can apply that same thing to like an interview, or like, I'm going to drop this clip, then I'm going to bring up the music, and it's going to, if you hit it, if you've built up to that moment, it can have that same kind of emotional lift as a piece of music. And it seems like you've grasped that talking about like transferable skills.
For sure.
That's what I think is great about Alison's podcast is this, the NPR style of it. It's that it sets it apart from a lot of other podcasts because, Alison, when you're narrating your journeys, you have the music, you have all these supporting things, the sounds that you collect as, you go through your day on the trail.
If I may say so, it's almost cinematic, just to throw that in.
Yeah, it's like it's an essay, right? Like it's a type of essay with creative elements, and it's very different. It has that NPR style, and it is very different than most podcasts, because most podcasts are just this. I'm not going to say lazy, because it's a lot of work to do a podcast. It is, but they're not as layered, I guess I would say.
I mean, it's more
I think in Alison's case, you like
performative.
Immersive might be the term.
Immersive, yeah. I mean, it's the personal essay with the. I mean, and I have, it's multi. People ask like, how does it look? And I use not Pro Tools, but the other one, Adobe Audition. It's layers of stacked. And, there's my voice going here, and there might be some ambi. And then all of a sudden, way, way, way down, it's like, that's where the, the cuckoo sang, it's like, there's a little, the clip from the cuckoo, or the clip from the, whatever it is, the waterfall or something coming in. And then, yeah, you're right. It's like getting the sounds just right. It is very, that excites me so much to do that, because that's almost like, I never really thought about it till right now, but the way it looks on, for your listeners to understand what this is. So we don't do editing anymore with tape. We do it digitally, as you guys know for sure, but anyone who's listening doesn't know exactly what it looks like. And there's just like track, and you can stack as many as you want on your computer screen, and they're all playing at the same time. You can turn one off or whatever. But it looks like a musical score. It's exactly like a musical score. Here are the strings, here are the woodwinds, here's the brass and the percussion and the harp, and the harp doesn't play until page 57. So we don't do anything. And all of a sudden, boom, harp has big solo, and she's on the last, or he's on the last line. So there's something very much like composing a symphony when I bring all those sounds together. And it's just kind of my favorite thing to do. I'm writing it. You want to know about my process? I don't know, going maybe too far.
No, it's funny until it's funny until you mentioned that. I feel like it's always, because I do a lot of audio editing, with this show, and I'm actually working on an audio book that I've been doing forever. We'll talk about that another time. Billy's waiting for the steam to start pouring out of my ears. But no, I've never thought about it until you mentioned that. It does actually kind of look like, if anyone's ever looked at a score, or like for like a symphony or a piece of music like that, where you've got this thing here on this line, and then maybe up above, and then you kind of see where one thing's kind of running constant.
Lines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where it'd be like where on a piece of paper it would be like certain notes for certain instruments, but on for those of us, we could make a video showing you what this looks like, because I've got, Lord knows, I've got tons of files. But yeah, it does have that look where you just see pieces kind of everywhere, scattered about. But when in its totality, it makes this unified thing.
Right. And I guess, it's funny. I hadn't really thought about this till now either. So this is really interesting to come on a podcast and not have like canned answers, because you guys are sort of inspiring me. When I was young, so when I was a kid, the movie The Sting came out, and brilliantly, Marvin Hamlish compiled the music for it. And what he did, it's not the time period at all, but it sounded like it's a time period. So the time period is supposed to be like, I think, the 20s. And Scott Joplin, he was like the 1880s. And he used Scott Joplin as the soundtrack, but orchestrated it. So I don't think Joplin orchestrated it himself. I actually am not sure about that. Most of it was piano rags, the entertainer, and this music became so popular in the late 60s, early 70s. I'm trying to think of the year the movie came out, that probably
sometime definitely in the 70s.
Yeah, that they played on the radio all the time. So it'd be like da 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 da. And I started, I'm just a little kid, I'm conducting. And I was like, I want to be a conductor. And I probably would have been a good conductor, because look at my hands going crazy. And I was told, don't ever do this, people. I don't think people do it anymore. But I was told, like, girls aren't conductors. And that I had to play the violin. Now, why on earth they chose the violin, which is absurd, because there are conductors who play all sorts of instruments. Some conductors don't even play an instrument that's in the orchestra, like guitar instead. It doesn't make any difference. All you need to do, you just need to, you just need to be able to read a score. So, like, I think that ship has sailed. I don't think it's possible. But I went to college and I know how to conduct. I can, but I've never really studied with anyone important. But in a way, what I'm making has that kind of composition quality to it, but also the conductor piece, the one that's saying, oh, you know what, flute, bring the volume down. We need to hear more of the second viola, whatever. You're not going to hear second viola, but second violins or something. We need to change the volumes to match and to make it work. So that kind of intricacy and it takes a long time to do, right? That's why I don't
Oh,
do
yes.
one every single week. But that kind of brings out that piece that maybe I was told not to do because I was a girl.
Oh, whatever. People can, whoever said that can stuff it.
Screw them. So I mean, like
Oh,
you,
God.
you were. I want to go back to, so when we talked about at the beginning and you went through your 60-second, there's so much in there. You squished so much in there that I feel like people are going to be like, oh, I didn't hear that part, right?
Okay.
So I want to, we'll get to the obstacles later. I do want to talk about the obstacles you've faced, especially in the past couple of years. But
Yeah.
before that, please explain to our listeners, because before you, I didn't know what through hiking was. So
Oh, yeah.
explain the type of hiking you do and what it entails, please, because you're like, I know it's going to be a dialogue back and forth, but like the types of food you eat and how long you're gone and all of that.
So, yeah, I mean, this is a whole other piece of me that throughout my whole life, I've been a walker and a person who wants to be in the outdoors, but primarily this kind of experience of like moving through space. I mean, I know a lot of people walk, everybody walks, people walk, they take walks. But there's that kind of like adventure walk, or it's a time of solace, but like a time of groundedness, a time of like, I do a lot of talking to myself, processing, whatever. I've done that from the beginning. And then it sort of turned into longer day hikes and backpacking. Most people know what that is. It means that you're going out overnight. And sometimes it could just be one night, but you're carrying everything you need. So if it's going to be raining, you got to probably have a tent. How many days you're going to be out, you need to carry food with you, etc. And eventually I started doing much longer backpack trips. So, I mean, it wasn't till like 12 years ago that I did my first trip that you would call a through hike. I mean, anything's a through hike if you're going from point A to point B, and that covers the entire trail. So, for instance, it could be something like the Appalachian Trail, Georgia to Maine. I mean, that would be a through hike. Or it could be something shorter. It could be in Minnesota, where I live. Listen how I said it, Minnesota. I'm not from here, but I'm starting to speak like that. In Minnesota, we have a trail called the Kekakabik Trail, and it's 41 miles. So it's significant. I mean, I can't do it in a day, and you wouldn't want to. It goes through the Boundary Waters, way up in northern Minnesota, and it goes from the Gunflint Trail to Ely. So if you hike that whole thing, even though it's only 41 miles, as opposed to Appalachian Trail being, 2,100 miles, it's still considered a through hike because you've gone from point A to point B. So anyway, I had done trails and I'd gone to a lot of different parts of the world. I was really getting hooked on it. So 5 years ago, I asked Minnesota Public Radio if I could have a leave of absence. I went through all the proper channels, got the leave of absence to take a half a year off work and do what's considered a long distance through hike. So that would be something more than 1,000 miles, take you months and months to complete. And I chose, just because it was like this one opportunity, I went to New Zealand because New Zealand has an Appalachian Trail. It's called the Te Araroa, and Te is the, and Araroa means like long pathway or long journey in Maori. So it's New Zealand's long pathway, and it's almost 2,000 miles. I added some more because there's actually a third island in New Zealand. So I went to the third island and did more there. So I ended up doing about 2,000 miles, and it was amazing. But it takes months and months of time. And it's this huge commitment, not just of time, but of kind of like, I mean, your life stops. You can't, I mean, I imagine some people are sponsored or something. But what I did while I was in New Zealand is I had a sponsor who had me create these audio narratives. And so I would talk about where I was or some idea that came up, and I was gathering sound. So it was really the first time I was doing it for money, which was crazy, and doing it on the trail, which is extremely hard to do because it takes a lot of battery power. So you end up collecting things, but you really have to wait till you're back in town and are plugged in. And so I started doing that. And it was really interesting. I think people really loved that kind of, it's just this very strange thing I'm into. I'm into this, I'm into the experience of hearing as opposed to seeing. So seeing's great. You know, you're watching, you know, a National Geographic adventure or something, and you're seeing these amazing places that maybe you can't go because it's by plane and it's the North Pole or something. But when you describe it, you require the listener to engage and fill in the blanks. You know, they're not seeing exactly what it is. Their imagination gets kind of tweaked. And your inflection of the voice, and of course, the choice of the sounds that you bring in, heightens what their experience is. And so, I mean, so that's why you really want to find the perfect clip, and you want to find the perfect words to convey that. It's not just sort of reading something. It's also the performance of the voice. So that's what I did. And I was a through hiker because I was going all the way from Cape Ringa to Bluff, and I was through hiking.
So I want to approach this. I'm just going to say this. So for me, I look at what you do and I'm amazed because like the longest I've ever walked in a single day is probably when I was in Italy. And, you know, most people looking at what you do, I mean, people look at the things that I do, a lot of people, and will tell me like, oh, well, I couldn't do that because I don't have your willpower. I don't have your blah, blah, blah. And I think people would look at you and say, oh, that's great that Alison can do that, but I can't because I am too old. I can't because I have never walked before. I can't because I have a full-time job. I can't because I'm married. I can't because, and they would name all these things. And I'm just going to let you respond to that because I think you probably have something to say about that.
Yeah, I just watched this wonderful movie. Have you guys seen Naiad yet? Annette Bening plays the swimmer who went from Cuba to Florida. Pretty amazing. She does it at
I literally just watched it last night, but we'll have to bleep it out because it struck work. We'll just say go look for a movie about a famous swimmer on Netflix. But yes, it is fantastic.
65-year-old. I don't want to give anything away, but I mean, you know, yes, you're too old for some things. I just got through saying that, you know, that ship has sailed. I probably will never be a conductor. And it's like, well, you know, if I really, really wanted to be a conductor, there are places that could use my work and my artistry. Maybe not building a career where I'm conducting the Berlin Philharmonic or something, or the Minnesota Orchestra. I mean, that may be a little, it's possible I could, if I really, really worked hard. But of the things I named, yeah.
But of the things I named, like, what are some things that I just named that you have done that in spite of, right?
Right. I mean, so it's funny. So like, I mean, I think to answer that question too is like when people say, well, you know, too old, I can't do that. Right. I mean, you first have to want to do it. There has to be a motivation to, and a desire to make this thing happen. And I will tell you, I mean, through hiking is really amazing and really cool. I don't do a ton of it right at this moment. For numerous reasons. It's a lot of time to be away. And I'm married. My husband's not as into it as I am. And he's still working. I'm working too. So like, it's hard to just devote all that time. And I kind of thought I was going to, and then it just starts to feel like so many months. So I started kind of making it a little bit smaller, bite sizes. And that felt a little better for me. But it is a really cool adventure because it's like a full-time job. It takes over your whole life. You're completely into this thing. But to the answers of like some of those, you know, I can't because. I mean, there's always a way to do things if you want to. They may not look like what you think they're going to. So I have a friend named Mary Davison, who is known as the old lady on the trail. She's actually written a book called Old Lady on the Trail. And she's what we call a triple crowner. A triple crowner is somebody who's walked the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. So those are the biggest trails in the United States. And she's walked them all, not all at once, not fast. She did it over 16 years, but she finished every step of them. So she's earned this title of triple crowner. But let's do the math. 62 years old plus 16. That means she was 78 when she finished. Think about that, y'all. I mean, I find it hard to walk. I'm 58. And I find a lot of stuff is starting to get like, ooh, it's hard for my body. I got to go slower, or I'm not sure I can, keep going at the pace, obviously at the pace I used to. So her hike doesn't look the same as a 25-year-old. So there's that piece. I have a job. Well, you can leave your job. You can ask for a leave of absence from your job. There's a lot of things that you can do to make this thing happen. Or you can say, I'm not going to do it through hike for 5 months. I'm going to bite size 1 month this year, 1 month that year, 1 month next year. So it doesn't look quite the same as everybody else's. You're doing something a little bit different. So I met people who were finishing at Mount Katahdin. They were doing all of Appalachian Trail. And it took them, I think, 10 years to do it because they had other obligations. They had a family. They weren't going to go for the 5 or 6 months that it required. They did it in bite sizes. And then like all these other things that people say, you're so brave. People tell me I'm so brave. I'm not brave at all. I'm stubborn and I'm willful and I'm a person who learns from my mistakes, and I think I'm a person who always, even if I get down, I'm not a person who's like a happy-go-lucky, hey, blissful hiker. I mean, it's kind of a joke a little bit because I'm not always blissful. I tend to get beat up, but then the next morning I get up the next day or whatever, I get up the next morning and I feel like, let's give it another try. Let's do a do-over. And so that's a kind of persistence, maybe certainly a resilience.
Do you think a lot of it is just, especially past a certain age, because I used to do martial arts, and the people that always amazed me every time I'd go to seminars, you see these guys who are granted, when I stopped when I was 39, like going formally, but I was seeing people who were in their late 40s, 50s, 60s. My teacher was pushing 70 and he could still just do stuff that just amazed me. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of it, and one of the things, like talking to some of those people, and this may be the case with you, it's just accepting that kind of heightened level of difficulty that, like, I know with martial artists, and you may have some of the same issues. It's just like they're past a certain age, you're just always injured. It's like you're always fighting something with, it's like whether it's a knee or a hip or your back, and you just got to go, okay, that's it. That is what it is. And I'm going to find a way to work through it or work around it.
Yeah. I mean, for sure.
Kind of like,
yeah, I mean, one of the things, so Mary Davison is a friend of mine, but I interviewed her for a different podcast I do from Blissful Hiker. It's like an interview program. And the first thing I said is like, you must have good genes, to be able to do this. So, she must not have I've had both my hips replaced fairly young. I mean, a couple of years ago. And it's just because arthritis sort of runs in the family and we're all having our, limbs fall apart or our joints fall apart. And she said, no, I don't have good genes. I have terrible genes. I had to have my knees replaced. And she's gone through, like you're saying, it's like you're always injured. I don't know if she's necessarily always injured. I mean, that's like, but you may always have some thing you're nursing or something that you have to watch. Like I have to be careful not to push too hard because I'm starting to get into a space where I could get those, it's the feet things. It's the, what's the thing? Plantar fasciitis. Or that thing in the Achilles. And it just started last year. I was like, where is this coming from? Really? And I was like, well, this is what happens. And so what you have to do is you have to accommodate that. And so this is not necessarily my advice, but Mary said something quite interesting. She said the most important thing to do as a hiker, especially if you're getting older, is to not compare yourself with anyone else, but not compare yourself with the person you used to be, which is really hard to do. Because you're like, last year I was great. It's like, but it's not necessarily you've done anything wrong. It's just that at a certain point, your joints do start to wear down. And your muscles don't have, no matter how much you work out, they just don't have the same ability to have that tone. You don't bounce back as fast. It's harder to sleep on the ground. That's for dang sure.
I'm curious to know that, like, having gone through the experience of having been, like being a professional flute player, and then having to go into now you're having to shift careers. You've had that process of having to mourn like your past self to move on to a new self. And does that process help, like, as you're, hiking, continuing into, as you get, because like we're all getting older, as you're at some point, you're going to start breaking down. And I feel like a lot of athletes or a lot of people trying to do physical stuff, if they get past older, they can't get over that hurdle of like, oh man, I used to be able to do this thing, or I used to be so fast or so strong. And like they just can't let that person go in order to move on to what they could be doing now.
Right. Because we have so much more until the day we die, or if we, I guess completely lose our faculties. We have so much to give and so much to learn still. You have to have some ability to let go of that. I just got back from a conference where I spoke. It's the Association of Experiential Education. And it was really interesting. I met amazing people. And so they're using experiential education usually it's using the outdoors as a way to learn things. Therapy is a part of it. And just, it touches all different disciplines. But I met a woman who came all the way from South Africa, Leonie. She was really cool. And she was showing me her method with young people. And it had sort of 4 pieces to it. So it was the mind, the body, the spirit, and the soul. And I was like, okay, I usually see it as a triad, like mind, body, spirit. And I said, why do you have spirit and soul? They're different things. And she said, well, she's working with young people. Okay, so these are young people who usually can do anything. If they're able-bodied, they don't have any pain and they're just like running and throwing themselves everywhere and skiing down mountains. They're fine. So they don't have to think about being careful. And she said,
I always say youth is the superpower you don't know you have until you've lost it.
I know. And I hate them. Mm-hmm. I want a time travel machine. But she said, spirit is like how you relate to, the spiritual, the thing that's sort of whatever that piece is that's outside ourselves, or is the universe, or is the thing that keeps us connected with other people, sort of the meaning of life. But soul has to do with, who are you outside of what you can do? And I thought, it's very scary stuff. But when you're working with young people who are still defining who they are, you can help develop maybe a lifelong learning of this piece of you that's the same with the piece of you that changes. And the piece of you that's the same, is the soul, is the deepest part of you, I think we all have different answers for that. But the one that I told you about, who's not brave, but is persistent or something, that those deep things that motivate us, that keep us going in spite of adversity, in spite of loss, in spite of fear and anger and sorrow, all the negative pieces that somehow, we take a deep breath and we're like, I'm getting up for another day. And now we're going to get into this body and see. Thank God I have not experienced a radical change. Someone who's had a catastrophic accident, for instance. I have a friend whose husband fell off the roof and they thought he would be a quadriplegic, but bit by bit by bit, he's moving. But it's, his life has totally changed, and it's just heart-wrenching. But, he's going on. So that kind of catastrophic change, that's a whole psychological journey. But for most of us, it's bit by bit, and it's finding out, oh, that thing that I thought it was just a muscle pull. And I finally go in to see a doctor and they do an x-ray and they say, you don't have any cartilage left at all in your hips. And you're like, well, what does that mean? Well, see, you have to get a hip replacement. You're thinking, what? But I just walked 5,000 miles. And then you do it, and then you do all the right things, and then you're able to walk again. And it's like, wow. But you're not quite the same. I had a cancer diagnosis this summer, and fortunately, I'm unbelievably lucky I had a very major surgery, but I didn't have to have radiation or chemotherapy, which some people get through it flying colors and they go on and everything's fine. Some people have serious side effects. I was terrified of that. So I didn't need to take the time to do it or the risk to do it. But it's a reminder of your fragility and your vulnerability, and certainly makes you say, all right, there's, time's running out. Let's get on it. No messing around here.
But what I
Let's
love,
do the things.
Allison, is your reaction to that, because I remember when this happened,
Pissed.
and this is why, no, not the pissed part, the like, and I think this is why we had a 2-hour conversation. It's like you and I both have that same extremely persistent spirit that is like, and also the defiance thing of like, fuck you, I'm going to do this anyway.
Oh, are we
And
allowed to say
so, what?
It's a podcast. We can say the F
Oh, we
word.
can swear.
That's right.
Yeah,
Let
we're
it
not
fly.
on radio. Also, I swear a lot. So when you found out, you already had a trip planned,
Yeah.
right? So explain that.
That sucked. That really, yeah. What is it John Lennon who says life happens when you're making other plans? That's really hard. And I wouldn't say I was necessarily mostly angry about like, oh, well, now I can't do my, trail hikes. It was because I had dealt with a lot of loss, and just the pile was getting really high, and I was starting to dig out of it and starting to feel more like myself. And then I was like, oh, by the way, you have invasive breast cancer. And I was like, what? Me? I'm healthy, but I'm healthy, and of course that's all. I mean, healthy people still get cancer. They don't exactly know why, but people get it. And so like, yeah, I mean, I've been writing a lot about this lately. So like, in addition to my podcasts, I do, the blogs, which talk about things. It's all nonfiction at the moment, but I also write about ideas and sort of toxic positivity, like, well, look on the bright side, or keep your spirits up. And I'm like, I'll use your F-bomb. Fuck that. Let's celebrate, or at least embrace and enter into the hard emotions and have them be real, because they can work for us, and they worked for me. Because
I've noticed you had a section just about quitting, which I found fascinating.
Oh,
it's not.
yeah, that's a whole other thing. But I mean, like anger and sorrow and all that stirring up can sometimes really work for you to motivate you to do the next right thing and get through it, rather than being in denial. The quitting piece, yeah, is a whole other.
Well,
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to
what I wanted, but before you move on to that, what I was getting at was the fact that I think, going back to my other question from before about the reasons people say they can't do something.
Yeah.
A lot of people would have just been like, well, I guess I'm staying home now. You didn't. You were like,
yeah,
fuck that. I'm doing part of this trip anyway. My doctor said it was okay. I'm going to go do this trip. And then when they tell me to come back, I'll come back and I'll deal with it then. Right. I'm going to put this.
The timing was pretty, I mean, it was really, really weird. And my, surgeon, she's not really a backpacker. She's a hiker, but she's like 2 years older than I am. And she understands me. So what happened was you go through the whole stages. For the women here, you have a screening, and then it's like, we need to do another screening, and then we need to do a biopsy, and then we need to do a lumpectomy. I mean, it's just, and each time you're thinking, okay, this is the last one. And it's like, oh shit, I got to do another one. And, and they were fairly certain that I had a kind of pre-cancer, which is also called like a carcinoma in situ, and it's not invading yet. And they hadn't gotten all of the labs back, and I already had like my plane ticket and my plans, and I was going to go to Maine, in the United States, to start the Appalachian Trail. Not necessarily to walk the whole thing. I didn't have intention to be a through hiker. I was going to do a different hike the rest of the summer, but I wanted to try like the hardest part of it, and it kind of excited me because Maine is killer. the Appalachian Trail. I'm really surprised how hard that trail is. And so they didn't have the results. And when I was like, what do I do? She said, the best thing for your prognosis is to walk, is to just get out there, go. We'll contact you. Just, and it may be like, maybe okay. You just kind of go on. Or if we have to do, they thought maybe they'd have to do some radiation at some point. There's sort of a dividing line of how many months you can wait until it's just like, it's going to be too late. And so I went, and you had this kind of hanging over your head. So it was very intense for me, and it was hard because it was 90 degrees climbing up Mount Katahdin and hot and sunny and bugs.
God.
And I came down and lightning and thunder came, and then the entire, weather changed to like the 40s and rain, which is all, being outdoors is like, 40s is not that cold if it's dry, but in rain. So it was like really hard hiking, and I met these really neat people and everything. But I guess it took me just about 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a phone call that said, we've got some bad news. You need to come home. Because we're going to have to do something. We don't have to. They tell you don't have to. You can treat it with herbs if you want. I'm like, I'm not going to treat it with herbs. You're going to cut everything out that there is. So, So I guess that like, that's the part that people say is like, what the hell? How'd you do that? I don't know. I think it's, as I said, it's kind of a stubbornness or determination, or I like to see what will happen to my body, mind, and spirit. What is going to happen. And it
Well,
was good.
after the surgery, what was the joke you made that you are now?
Oh, I'm an ultralight hiker. So it was actually came from a friend. I put something up online that said, my boobs are trying to kill me, so we got to take them off, got to hack them off. And a backpacking friend of mine wrote and said, well, now you'll be a real ultralight hiker. Think of the weight savings. I laughed. But we're always, they call us gram weenies. Your gram weenies, when you're thinking of every single gram that goes into your backpack. I can't take that bandana because it weighs a half an ounce, and so you throw it out. I can't take that, I don't know, but whatever it is, you throw everything out. And so if you weigh less because you don't have a body part or two body parts, you're an ultra light hiker in the true sense of the word.
Just more aerodynamic.
Now you can become an Olympic archer.
What was it, like the old Amazons? You just had you just pull it straight across and just.
Oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought of that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, wasn't that the thing, Billy? Like they said that the Amazons of old would literally cut off a breast so they could draw like clean across their chest.
Yeah, that's the tale. I don't know what truth there is to any of that stuff, but I thought it was ancient Greece, but maybe you're right. I don't know.
Yeah, so they like I won't say the Amazons or the ancient Greece, or like were made because like they were the people that Wonder Woman are supposed to come from or whatever. But that was the legend that like they would take off a breast so it wouldn't get in the way of their archery.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I think
that is hardcore.
I don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but I do think that having cancer sucks, and it's very hard because you're terrified it's going to come back or spread. And a mammogram a mastectomy is not 100%. So you have a lot of existential angst about it. That being said, it is so great not to wear a bra. I can't tell you how good it feels. To just be kind of a stick and not. I
enjoyed not wearing one because they look like they'd be a pain.
You know exactly what I'm talking about, Brandon.
I see my wife and just sometimes like that doesn't look like it feels good. It looks good, but it doesn't look like it feels good.
Yeah, no.
When you take them off and there's welts, it's always like,
oh yeah. You pick this and it's like, oh man, there's like hard wires and shit in this thing. It's like that cannot feel good over wearing it over an entire day. Yeah. But yeah, I digress. But
We went
no,
down a rabbit hole here.
that's a weird
Right.
route. But no, I'm curious because I was so checking out your website. You also are a photographer. So what's cool again, getting back into like the cinematic quality of what you do. I'm curious how much of this, getting back to the creative angle,
Yeah.
how much of this are you like composing like as you're out walking, or like taking those moments like, oh, that's I want to use that later. Like you hear that sound or go chase
Yeah.
this or go record that. Like how much of that is done on the hike as you're doing it and then just hope like you're remembering it, or is it just kind of like coming back home and then reflecting? Obviously you have to record the sounds while you're there, but
Right.
like what is that, the process of translating that back into the podcast or the writings on the website?
Yeah, I mean, I love that you asked that question because one of the things I learned in New Zealand was that if you didn't organize at least some of your work every day, so you're in your tent at night and people are like snoring, or if you hear them next to you and you're kind of on your phone pulling some things together, you can't remember and you can't keep track of it. I mean, the job would be enormous. So what I started doing was writing like in the Notes app. So I have an iPhone, writing on the Notes app as I go in the day, like things that happen, something I saw or some thought that came up. Sometimes it's just like it's sort of in shorthand. And even by the end of the day, I can't remember everything that happened. So it helps me to write something. And I get fairly disciplined that when I lay down, I like write the essay for that day right then and there. And I organize the pictures I take through the day then and there too. I have kind of a like a little app that I can sharpen them and do a tiny bit of editing on them and put it in a folder. So that helps me stay organized. And it's not just like a process or like a plan. Just like in music, I'm very disciplined. But it's also because, I mean, the question that you asked had to do with like how you're approaching the material, I guess. And, you're walking along and you have an application here that can take a picture, gather a sound, or take your writing. I suppose you could talk into it too, but, writing. And you have to decide which one of those you're going to do, usually, because it can be just a situation where sometimes I'm like, do I want to hear, get that sound, or I want to try to get a picture of that thing?
I was just wondering, because like on one hand, you want to be present for the journey, but in order to record it, there's that thing you have to step back and now go
and now
again,
you're sort of the artist
type.
or the curator, right? But I read something one time about taking pictures in, people taking millions and millions and millions of pictures. And what they said was that it actually helps you remember and frame the experience better. I mean, remembering is one piece of it, but framing it. So, I mean, like, let's just say, like, right now, I'm looking at Brandon and I'm going to take his picture and I come in. So it's just the size of your face. And he's made a face, right? And it's like, it especially if I'm in motion, we're walking, it captures, it like tells the story to my brain, to me, of what I'm experiencing. It's not just this kind of I've met somebody or I've seen that tree, but it's like, ooh, that tree looks like it's weeping, and I want to capture it with the light behind it. So I spend a lot of time framing pictures, and somebody asked me in a talk yesterday, there's like, do you take a selfie stick or a tripod? How do you get so many pictures of yourself? And I said, well, I hand my phone to people and ask them to take my picture when I see them. And then I complain about how bad they are at taking pictures because I'm so critical, because people don't always know how to frame pictures. They'll cut your feet off.
I was gonna say that's going to be a mixed bag, because there's seen watching a lot of or looking at a lot of Instagram pages. There's some people who really don't know how to use their phones.
It's not just that.
75 pictures up, and it's like, just get one that captures the decisive moment. Now, that doesn't mean you take one picture. You can take 75 pictures, but you choose it. You know what I mean? So I'm sorry, Billy, you were going to say something.
I was just going to say, I actually, like, when I got headshots done for acting a few years back, I actually just told the photographer, I was like, what ends up happening is when people are taking photos of me, I'm always like, I get weird mouth tension. Whereas if I'm just like, if I take a selfie, I can always know like, oh, that's the angle. This. So she just was like, oh, I'll just turn my laptop around and you'll be able to see it out of the corner of your eye. I'm like, great. And that
Oh my
worked. So
gosh.
like just being able to see myself, I know if I'm like, like making
I
some
get the
weird
like.
face. Because I feel like otherwise people just capture you and you're like, that's not what I look like. I swear to God. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, I was just somewhere recently and I said, just take it right from here. And then they were like, I'm going to come in closer. And then they lost all of the background
Oh,
just to see me. And it was like, okay, well,
Mm.
it's fine. I
so they
know.
lost
I
the
don't want to be,
context that you wanted?
Well, it's
yeah.
also, I think a lot of people, they look when they're out taking pictures like, I just want the picture of me. It's like, no, sometimes it's like you're just there to give perspective and the background's really the thing,
Right,
and
right. Scale and interest. So just to answer your question, I think it is. It's like the act of participating artistically, creatively, I guess would be the word. So taking photographs, which I put into my blog and on Instagram and on Facebook, of course, and LinkedIn. I mean, I use my photographs quite a bit, but not for the podcast so much. So you're in it creatively, and you're invested. You invest in like this experience differently too, because you're looking for things or you're open to things. And this is something that the trail does that not many other things in my life do. The trail asks for you to be the most present you can possibly be. Like, so when we're always looking to be mindful and living in the present moment, it's really hard to do. We tend to be, either have anxiety about the future or we have regrets about the past and their intention. And sometimes you can be driving your car and you don't even know where you are, right? Because your brain's so full of stuff. When you're walking, it's hard to do that. And also it's really hard for your expectations to be fulfilled because weather changes and it's never going to look like the Patagonia ad. It's usually a lot harder than that. So, it requires you to be, to kind of give up power and be really in the present moment and accept what's on hand and to be, ready to be surprised. I don't know if you guys saw that picture that I took it was a sunset. I was at what was it? It was a funny name of a hut. They're not huts. They're sort of shelters. It's a funny name of one in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And it was just kind of like, oh, we're in the woods and here we are. And then, the sun was going down. Okay. And then all of a sudden it like exploded into these purples and just did this thing with all the mountains. And you look at those mountains, you go, I walked across all those mountains, mostly in the forest. And this is my one moment of being above them and seeing it. I'm out in the open now and I can see because the Appalachian Trail is in the green tunnel most of the time. So, to be open to that kind of thing. And of course, because we have iPhones and it's not film, you can take 7,000 pictures if you want to, every moment of that sunset. And I stood out there. People would come and go, oh, it's really beautiful. Click. And then they'd leave. And I'm sure they had a good experience, but there was something about staying in it that was really cool. So.
I want to ask you, because you were talking about how present you have to be. And I think what kind of sums up everything that you've been through and that you do for me is that most people, and this is where I go back to my question before, and most people are content to be comfortable and to live in comfort. And then they get upset when these things happen that throw them off the comfort train, right? Of, if they get a cancer diagnosis, if they have to have a hip replacement, if it's too cold out, or if they get bed bugs or whatever. And like, these are all things that you have experienced, and either at home or on the trail, it's like embracing the entirety of the human experience, whether peak on a mountain watching a sunset or the adversity that you face, knowing that it's below freezing and you have to hunker down for the night. All of these things, I feel like, does that give you a greater appreciation of life in general? Does that, I mean, everything you
Yeah.
talk about in your podcasts, it ends up being very philosophical, I feel like.
Yeah.
I don't really know what
Well,
my
I mean,
question is. I'm just
no, it's a
Actually, I'll
great.
piggyback on that because I want to like, because I feel like this, what I'm thinking of is kind of dovetailing, right? You know, kind of, or spinning out of what Billy's saying. I'm wondering because you having come from this artistic background, like arts and media, does that help you out there on the trail because you've got this almost like you kind of got, even if you're kind of creating your own like hero's journey in your mind, does that help as you're facing that hardship and the struggle? Because now you're thinking, because I feel like a lot of great athletes have that mindset. They're like, yeah, it's gonna suck, but it's gonna be so cool when I win in the end. You,
Right. I mean, there's like what do they call that? First degree fun and second degree fun or something. You know, where it's fun right now, and the other one's like it's not fun, but
oh.
later it's like, oh, that
or
actually was
the
kind of
juice
fun.
is worth the
Hmm.
squeeze.
Yeah, I mean, I think some much wiser person than I had a quote that had to do with how we become philosophical as we get older and we face loss and we face hardship. I mean, all of us face hardship, right? Every one of us does, to greater and lesser degrees. But normally, I mean, I guess statistically, as you get older, there's just more, because people die and you have to face, losing your ability to move, losing, this great career you had. That sucked. Um, I think, I think that's another part of myself that I don't totally understand, but I think it's really worth people considering and cultivating is an idea of being willing to embrace the suck, I guess you would say, embrace the mud, embrace the place to be able to enter it. And I just read this book about PTSD and how they have like three different levels of how people manage trauma. I mean, they were doing studies with people who come out of the towers in 9/11. I mean, with their lives and how horrifying it was. And some people were just kind of had resilient personalities, and other people had it took time, but eventually they recovered. And then there's the ones who were kind of stuck in the trauma, and it was just so much harder to come out. And some of the training that they do, nobody's right or wrong, and nobody's healthier or not healthier. It kind of has to do sometimes with the level of the trauma, the timing of it, and maybe your personal history. But they found that that helping people somehow be willing to enter into the difficulty, to be maybe that whole thing about being fully present. And that's why I say don't push aside anger. Don't say I need to be positive. Just be angry. It's okay. That's part of it. But keep swimming through, and then, whoa, wait a second here. Okay, I'm not feeling as angry right now. Now I'm feeling like I want to do something. I'm feeling active, or I'm feeling, thoughtful, or I'm feeling quiet, to move through it. And I guess that's the metaphor of long distance hiking, is that you're always moving you're moving towards something. You're moving forward and moving through good days and bad days, shockingly, amazingly beautiful days, followed by shockingly, amazingly horrible days. And to kind of, know this too shall pass, you're going on. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but I think that's something I've discovered, like with the cancer and with like other stuff that's happened to me, is I'm not so sure I'm resilient, but I continue to engage with life, and continue, and like this program's about creativity, continue to engage with what the creator spirit and my own creativity of like, what can I do and how can I express this? So something like that.
No, that's beautiful, and I think, yeah, it kind of, I mean, I feel like we came full circle and sort of with everything, So we are already past the hour. I'll let Brandon
Oh,
do the
So yeah,
usual.
just at this point, we usually like say let you tell people where they can find you out there on the interwebs
So
if they
I'm
want to
Blissful
add you.
Hiker. I'm everywhere as Blissful Hiker, Blissful Hiker, on Instagram, on Facebook, and I have a website, blissfulhiker.com. Podcast is called Blissful Hiker. And I'd love to hear from you if there's something you heard that you want to ask about or talk to me about, or want to tell me I'm completely full of shit. I love that dialogue, so bring it on.
If you want to add her.
Oh, full of shit.
Well, I do have one last question. Like,
Okay.
having looked at your website and listened to your podcast, and then now having had this conversation, have you ever thought about doing some sort of documentary about what you do?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, I'm working on a book because it's been suggested to me to compile things, and so I'm writing every day. But you guys didn't ask about that, like Elizabeth. What's her name?
No, but that was going to be my follow up. So you're already ahead of me.
Elizabeth Gilbert. You have to meet the muse regularly. So you sit down and you write. You sit down, it's shit and it's shit and it's shit, and then suddenly it's not. Ooh, something's happening here. But documentary, maybe. I'm not much of a video person, and there's so many people in the backpacking world that do such beautiful. I mean, they look better on camera, and they're young, and they tell their stories, and they're just, and so maybe, but it hasn't. Maybe when I'm like really old.
I just feel like it's just a question of you meeting the right person out there. Like you hook up with some Nat Geo photographer who likes to hike, and magic is waiting to happen.
For sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm touched that you asked. Yeah.
I would watch that movie. I mean, we can't. Once again, we'd have to bleep it. But there's a movie out there about a climber, Alex Honnold, which is a brilliant movie about Alex Honnold climbing El Capitan.
Yes, you can find it. Just look, Google his name and Google documentary, and it'll come right up. I promise you.
But that story, it's like I don't care what he looks like. He's a skinny white dude. Whatever. It's not about what anybody looks like. The nature looks beautiful, but it is about his extreme perseverance.
Yeah.
And his planning. I mean, his planning. Most of the movie is about his planning to do this thing, and then he does it in 6 hours, and that's it. Right? He's just done. So most of the movie is him trying and failing and planning and learning the tiny skills that will lead to him being successful at this thing. And that was one of the most inspirational movies I've seen in the past, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, because I was just like, the whole time I was.
Oh yeah, that one is anxiety inducing, and that's why it's great.
But
I feel like it doesn't always have to, like the other thing on the other side for you. Okay, maybe there's not the anxiety. Obviously, there's hardship of it, but I feel like there's something there in your story that would translate into that type of medium. We're the right person to get a hold of it and frame it and shape it. It's just looking at your website and looking at your Instagram. I was like, there's definitely, I feel like you're right up against the edge of it. Like, I feel like you've got that eye. I'm looking at your pictures and saying like, you're just right there. You just haven't made you haven't covered that last bit of distance that's going to get you there, but you're so close.
Well, if any of our listeners are a documentary filmmaker and want a great subject, Alison is.
I don't know. I'm starting to think I might need to get myself in better shape and start getting some equipment, man. I might have to, if nobody else bites on that one, I might have to do it myself. Damn it!
Oh, I love it. Yeah, because I mean, I think the thing that those two movies we just talked about are people who are doing something that's like none of the three of us are going to do those, but because it's like out of beyond. But it is the same human spirit of like, keep trying, change this, do that. I can't do this thing, but I'm going to do that thing. And how do you pull it together? And how do you keep your brain from just exploding and telling yourself, all the critics coming in too.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say with them, like so much of it, and I don't know how this is for you, But with them, I mean, so much of it has to be mindset. They have to believe that they can do these things. If they didn't truly believe that they could do that,
Yeah.
I mean, to free climb the face of that mountain is insane.
Right.
Most
Or
people would just
to
immediately die.
swim from Cuba to
Right.
Florida, like,
Right.
and if you
Right,
go
but she-
find that movie,
Yeah. She does one thing though that's really interesting is she does push too hard and wants it too hard. I don't want to give the movie away. People may know about her attempts, but and doesn't listen to
well, I mean, yeah, it's a historical thing, so you can look it up. But I feel like, yeah, well, I'm feeling like the process and watching just all
Right.
the insane level of
All
stuff
of
she
those
has to go
pieces.
through.
Right. And you can really relate to that for sure. Yeah. I've been thinking, it's been on my mind definitely since I've watched it 2 days ago or something. It's just been like, ooh, what'd she do there? And I also really like seeing women on screen that are my age, representing my age group, 58 and 65, or 60 and 55, I guess, are their ages. And I was like, oh yeah,
Well, there's
'cause
also
we
this
don't-
nonsense out there. There was like a women, like, like there was a famous thing from Don Lemon. It's like, oh, they're not in their primes. Like, I'm like, I'm sorry, but like, fuck you, dude. I know so many women that like, especially just by, I guess maybe it's just by virtue of being middle-aged myself. And I know so many women that I feel like when they hit 40s, like they just getting started. I've watched people just shift into like a new gear. So many of my friends and other people I know, it's like it's something that happens to people. I think in just in general, you get to 40 and you just say, fuck it. I don't care what. It's like, I know what I want and I know what I can do. And it's like, it's almost like a jumping off point, like women. And there's so many women I've seen that have gone out there and it's like they find like 2 or 3 other gears they didn't even know they had. And you're like, before 40, they weren't even doing a fraction of that. And then you're trying to tell them that they're done. Like, fuck you, man.
Yeah. Don't tell anyone they're done. No one's done till
Life starts when you stop giving a fuck.
Yeah.
Hey, we need that on a t-shirt.
Awesome, you guys. This was so much fun.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, and we will be watching. I'm sorry, Billy. What were you?
I said thanks for being here. That's all.
Yes, and we'll be out there looking, and again, if no documentary filmmaker hits you up, we'll see what we can work out in the future when I get myself remotely enough in shape to keep up with you, because I'm pretty sure at this point I'd probably die after the first day trying to keep up with you.
I don't know about that.
Dragging me along the trail. That would end up being the movie, is me just doing this while you're kind of like not the movie we intended to shoot.
We just need sled dogs. Brandon on the sled.
Yes, the Blissful Hiker and the Dead Southerner.
Nice.
All right.
So much fun, you guys. Thank you so much for just a great hour. I appreciate it.
That will be all for this episode. To keep up with the show, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Scratch Claw Push. If social media isn't your thing, you can contact us at scratchclawpush@gmail.com. This podcast has been a Carcutta Media production. For a full list of our podcasts, go to carcuttamedia.com/podcasts. This recording, or any portion thereof, may not be reproduced or used in any manner whatsoever without the express written permission of the publisher, except for use of brief quotations and review. Copyright 2023 by Carcutta Media, LLC. All rights reserved.